This video, I'm willing to bet, is probably going to ruffle some feathers, but it's a hot topic lately. I want to talk about, first off, Mark Driscoll saying that the doctrine of Calvinism is garbage. I want to talk about that. And number two, I want to talk about Calvinism versus Arminianism, mainly the people that represent both of those theological camps. Now, let me say this. If you're not familiar with any of those terms that I mentioned, I completely understand. They are well known, but there is a possibility that you have not heard of them. Those are basically doctrines or camps that you would subscribe to, that your theology would line up with. I also will preface this video by saying I adhere to Reformed theology, Calvinism. That is me. So yes, you're getting this video from that perspective. I am not shy about that. And if you know me, you really know that about me. So that should not come off as a surprise to you. But here's what I want to say. First off, Mark Driscoll, he's in the news now all over again. He was he was on a radio show, podcast, something. I've never heard of it before. It's called The Debrief Show with a guy named Pastor Matt Brown. He interviewed Mark Driscoll. And they were talking about different forms of theology, and Mark Driscoll basically says that the doctrine of Calvinism is garbage. Now, why is this a big deal? Well, if you know Mark Driscoll, that's what I said. If you know Mark Driscoll, you might remember him from Mars Hill's day, before he was let go and the church dissolved and everything like that. But if you really know Mark Driscoll, you know that he was one of the leaders of the often criticized Young, Restless, and Reformed movement. This movement that saw Calvinism really grow in the church. And what was that, 10, 15 years ago? I'm not really sure. But he was one of the early ones, that started this, that brought in this. I mean, he's on the Calvinist documentary. So his past is Calvinism. He's spoken highly of Calvinism. Now, evidently, that has changed. Driscoll has gone through a lot in his ministry career. He is most well known for just swearing and lashing out at people on stage. But lately, he has sort of taken a real charismatic turn. And his most recent turn is saying that Calvinism is garbage. That's not a big deal, okay? So that's not, I mean, it is a big deal, but that's not what I'm trying to focus in on. Like, people bash Calvinism all the time, but it's just interesting that somebody who used to be a Calvinist, by his own admission, now says that doctrine is garbage. You normally don't hear somebody use such strong language if they were a certain theological camp attendee before. Normally they just say, I used to believe in this, but now I believe in this. And especially a guy like Driscoll, who is known for his, what's the word that I want to use? His colorful commentary that he might give towards certain people in theology. But he's now saying that Calvinism is garbage. This has been the big thing on the internet the last couple of days, and I got to thinking, okay, why is it that Calvinists, people in Reformed theology, are always the ones that are being called aggressive and arrogant and so many other words to describe negativity and harshness and things like that? Why is it always that? But those that are opponents of Calvinism, i.e. Mark Driscoll, they are the ones that normally are the most vocal about their hatred or about their distaste for Calvinism. We don't really hear about that too often. And it got me thinking in my personal interactions with Calvinists and with Arminians, who have I run into with the most problems? And adamantly, it's Arminians. I almost said Calvinists. It's Arminians, without a doubt, okay? I know Calvinists who don't represent Calvinism well, and I'm certainly not trying to say that all Calvinists are perfect and that there aren't any of us that are arrogant and prideful and the quote-unquote cage stage, if you will. But in my personal experience, at least, when I browse through groups and when I have conversations on the internet and when I talk to people, more times than not, I mean, go to Soteriology 101. Go to that Facebook group. Join that Facebook group. You want to talk about some upset people. The Arminians in that group, for the most part, are some of the most rude and arrogant and downright nasty people that I have ever come in contact with. Arminians, okay? Now remember, Calvinists are the ones that are always said to be the ones that are arrogant, and those are the ones that are always, they leave a bad taste in people's mouth. It causes them to run away from Christianity because Calvinists are so mean and arrogant. Remember, that's what's often said, okay? 90% of the time when I see negativity going on through my social media groups and internet and interactions and stuff like that, you know who it's coming from? It's Arminians. Like, I know Arminians that hate Calvinists. I mean, literally hate Calvinists. I'm not saying that they just really don't like the theology. I'm talking about they literally hate people involved in Calvinism. I have never, ever, and I spend a lot of time on the internet. Of course, I could be wrong. I have never seen a Calvinist say they hate Arminians. It just has got me thinking, why, and I just noticed this video, and I'll post a link to it, the video of the talk that Driscoll gave with this guy. It has 6.9 thousand views, 65 comments. It has 45 thumbs up and 136 thumbs down. It got me thinking, why is it then that there's not more light shed on the negativity coming out of the Arminian camp? And I don't know, maybe if it's just because I spend so much time on the internet, and so I see a lot more of it. And some of the people that I interact with, you know, obviously, like I talk to people from various theological camps, and so maybe I have more exposure to it. But I'm constantly hearing how Calvinists are just so negative. And this Driscoll thing, this Calvinism is garbage, I can't imagine somebody who used to be an Arminian, who now becomes a Calvinist, who is as well known as Driscoll, because everybody knows who Driscoll is. Like, he's got quite a following, good and bad, mostly bad, probably all bad. But I can't imagine that. Like, imagine if he would have said Arminianism is garbage. Imagine that. Like, the outrage. It blows my mind because, again, you know, Reformed theology is what really opened my eyes to Scripture, and that's when it all made sense to me. So Reformed theology is very near to my heart. Obviously, it's you know, and then I could hear people like, well, you just worship John Calvin, you just worship Reformed theology. Like, I don't know any. Again, I hear those statements all the time. I don't know anybody who's a Calvinist that worships John Calvin. Anybody. Like, I really don't. Like, these broad brush statements that are always getting thrown around. I don't know any. I know a lot of guys that adhere to Reformed theology and who consider themselves to be Calvinists. I don't know any of them that worship John Calvin. I always hear these statements like, you know, Calvinists just worship John Calvin and blah, blah, blah. And it's always coming from Arminians. It's always these guys attacking Calvinists. And I almost wonder, again, there's not, everybody in Reformed theology is not perfect, so there's always an exception to the rule, and there's people that represent the theology in a bad manner. But I'm wondering if we're making a lot out of something that's not really there. That we constantly are hearing about this negativity towards Calvinism that doesn't really happen that often. I'm wondering if that is the reason why there is this dissension. You know, again, because I know Arminians who hate Calvinists, who dislike the theology that much, that they slander and they are so vocal about their negativity is so voiced, they hate them. And I don't know any Calvinist that would say that they hate an Arminian, or that their tone towards an Arminian would represent them in a negative way. This Driscoll video just got me thinking, like, how important it is to adhere to what Scripture says. Okay. Now, of course, you're gonna hear me say that, and then you're gonna say, well, you're viewing Scripture through the Reformed theology lens, and then maybe he's viewing it through his own lens. And yeah, there is some truth to that, but I think the issue is Scripture needs to dictate our theology, not putting on a lens and then pushing that into Scripture. The Scripture needs to produce our theology. And so often what happens is an Arminian has such a strong distaste for Reformed theology that they automatically put on an Arminian lens to read Scripture. Well, no wonder why they're not seeing Reformed theology inside of Scripture, because they hate Reformed theology. Therefore, they're blocking it all out. It's no surprise that that's what happens. My challenge to all of us, Calvinists, Arminians, Reformed theology, whoever you adhere to, is to take your lens off, take your bias towards your theological camp, and take your distaste for the other theological camp. Take that off. Set it to the side. Read Scripture just to read Scripture. If you're in one of those places where you're not sure, because Mark Driscoll is clearly not sure about his theology. I've personally dealt with people who are not sure about their theology, and it comes out in hatred towards the other theological camp. It just always does. It comes out as arrogance and rudeness and hatred towards the other camp. That's where Driscoll is. Driscoll is currently in that mode where he's not sure about his theology, and so he is lashing out at the theology that he's pushing against. Let's read Scripture for what Scripture is, okay? Let's take our lenses off. Let's stop attacking the other camp just because you don't like that camp. Let's just read Scripture afresh.